our next project, we're going to be focusing on painting skills. And our end result with this project will be large painted letters spelling out Eagles Cafe for the cafeteria, and also realistic paintings of fruit and veggies or produce to go along with it. So your sign, your paintings, and your weavings will all be showcased or shown off at our art night on December 20th. So during this project, we will focus on craftsmanship. Craftsmanship means the quality shown in artwork and the care for an appropriate use of materials. So throughout this unit, we will learn how to mix paint colors and how to layer paint in order to create realistic representations of produce. Before that, however, before we learn how to mix paint and start to layer it, we need to learn what our procedure is in this class for gathering and cleaning materials, as well as how to use paint responsibly. And that is going to be the focus of this lesson. All right, here we go. Today you're going to need to put your name on some things that you will use every day during this painting unit. At your tables, you will see masking tape, plastic baggies, 4 compartment egg carton cutouts, and paper plates. Each one of you will need one of these 3 things. So you can go ahead and hand those out. Masking tape, what you do with that is pass it around. Take a little piece for yourself, long enough to put your name and period number on it, and slap it on your Ziploc bag. Make sure it's put nice and down properly. So I'll give you a minute. That's probably all you need to make sure you have one of each of these things. Now take your Sharpie and write your name clearly along with your period number on each of these items. So on the back side of the plate, write your name and period number, which I will have on the board. See that? It's backwards for you, sorry. On the bottom of your egg carton, or side I guess works. They're all kind of different, so just find a space that is visible. Boom. And then on your plastic baggie, on the masking tape, because it wants to smear off of the bag itself. Cap your Sharpie. Now everything is mine. So unfortunately, our first class, we will not have time to paint because we really need to focus on our procedures for collecting materials and putting materials back appropriately. But what we can do today is get our paint palettes ready and get our paint substrates, or the paper that we are going to paint on, ready, so we can skip that part of the video and instruction next class period and get to painting quicker. So for today, what you're going to first do is pick a piece of paper that is at your table. There is a stack for you, and make sure that your name is written in the bottom right hand corner of one side with your period number as well. Make sure it's clear enough that you can see it, and we will be able to paint on these next class period. When it's time to get started, you will follow the procedure Mr. Barber is about to show you in the classroom. Over to you, Mr. Barber.
Here we are at the painting station at the front of the room. Each table, every class period, will have 2 volunteers to come up here and collect materials. Here's what the first volunteer will collect. The first volunteer will take 1 tray. There are orange and red ones right here. I use a green one in the video at home, but you'll take one of the orange or red ones. And you will take 4 paints, one white, one red, one blue, and one yellow. Kind of be careful, there's a lot of weights there, so make sure that you're doing your best job at being a server and making sure that you're balancing the paints. You will also want to take a roll of paper towels, which is on the bottom shelf. And the last thing that you're going to need to collect, in addition to the paint and paper towels, is your containers with your brushes in them. You'll notice that written on these containers is the color of the tables. So if you're at red table, you'll grab the containers and brushes that say red. Set those on your tray. Here is what you should take back to your tables: paint, paper towels, containers, and brushes on a red or orange tray. So the second volunteer is in charge of gathering and prepping these materials. On the bottom shelf of the painting cart, there are little water caddies that look just like this. Doesn't matter which colors you grab, just make sure that you have a water caddy for each person at your table. You will also want to collect rags, so one for each person, and then an extra rag, and I'll show you why when we get to the table. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 rags. So this stack right here, 4 containers, 5 rags, would be appropriate for a table of 4 people. So then we'll take this to the table and I will show you what to do once we get there. Notice volunteer 1 has already come by with the tray with the paint and the containers, the brushes, and the paper towels on them. Volunteer 2, you've just come back with your towels and your water containers. You're going to want to lay down a towel, fold it in half, where each person sits. So it's at their seats in front of them. So for example, if this were a table of 4 people, they'd go right there. And then you will put the 5th rag right in the center of the table. The rags are to make sure that our water containers don't get the tables all moist and wet. So at the foot of each table is a red bucket filled with water, like this. You will take your water caddies and go ahead and directly sort of dip it into the bucket, fill it halfway with water, just like this. And for each person, you will set it on their rag. With the last rag that we have in the center of the table, we're going to use it to put one of our containers on that you grabbed with the brushes. This container, just like your water caddies, you're going to fill with clean water at the beginning of the day from your bucket, about halfway full. And you're not going to touch that until the end of the day, and I will explain what that's for when we do our cleanup process. So now what you're ready to do is pour paint into your labeled, or your name is on it, into your little egg carton receptacle. Tendency with paint is people want to use a lot of it. You don't need to. You can start small and you can always add more. A good point of reference for how much paint you should add to your egg carton at a time is same amount of toothpaste you use on a toothbrush. So, for example, when you're applying toothpaste, you squeeze out slowly, gradually trail it onto your toothbrush, seal it off. That's about how much you need. Here's my finger for scale. You don't need to use much more than that at a time. If you need more, you can always add more. So now at your tables, you may take turns squirting paint into your egg carton receptacle.
Shake it down to the bottom just like you would a ketchup bottle with your cap closed. When you open it up, make sure that you open it from this side. So if it's squirting out for some reason, just like ketchup does sometimes, this can catch it rather than it landing on the table and making more of a mess for you. Again, oops, just a little bit. It doesn't need to be more than a toothpaste amount. See how I got a little excited and shook it again with the cap open and it landed on there. Let's try and be even more careful than Mr. Barber. How about that? Okay, so let's try again here with the red. I'm shaking it down, opening it this way so this can catch any spillage. Carefully turning it around and squirting it pretty close to where it's supposed to land. There we go. That's a better attempt. Alright, and then yellow, again shaking it down, opening it like that. This spills out pretty quickly, so make sure that you're not squeezing it until you know you're over the spot where it's supposed to go. Then white, cap's closed while I shake it, open it. Squeeze it once I know it'll land where I want it to. There. Yeah, perfect. So you really shouldn't have much more than that paint, or than that amount of paint. Looks good. You'll notice that you have a variety of brushes, or brushes with different tips. Some have flat tips, like this, and some are more pointed, like this. Regardless of what brush you choose to start working with, it is important to know how you handle the brushes and how we make sure that the bristles stay nice and don't spread out. When you use a brush, you pretend that you're gently petting like a sensitive or small animal, like a rabbit or something. You don't put a whole bunch of pressure to where the brush starts to do this. You make sure that the brush pretty much keeps the form that it has when it's not touching paper. So gently like this. If you need to make a mark that goes up, turn your brush around so the bristles are going with the paper, not against it, like this. Also make sure that your brushes don't get pushed so much that the hairs on the brush start to spread. Don't be banging on the paper. The only reason I'm doing this with the brush is to show you what is not acceptable. We need to be careful with these so they can last and so they can make the marks we want them to. You now have everything that you need to start successfully painting. You have your paints, you have your paper plate where you are able to mix paints on, you have water to add to your paint to make it spread better. You have your brushes, and you also at your table have a collection of substrates or different kinds of paper that you can choose to paint on. So I'm now going to start painting. Let's do it. So I pick out a brush and pick out a paint color. I'm going to start with red. I'm a fan of the color. Instead of globbing it on the brush, I'm just going to lightly tap it like I'm poking somebody. Like I'm like, hey. Hey, that's about the amount of red paint that I need. So let's see. I'm gonna just see how thick it is on my paper plate, as in see how much I picked up on my brush. So here's where I kind of control how much I want to put down on the paper. So the plate's a really good place to do this because it kind of shows you what it would look like if you were to paint on your paper, as in like, does your paint lay nice and smooth, or does it look like little mountain ridges? Kind of what would it look like if it dried onto your paper? So I think I kind of want my paint to extend a little longer than it would by itself, or to get just cover more space. So I'm going to lightly dip just the same way I poked my red paint, like hey, poke my water, and just kind of just experiment with it. See how it lays on the paper. So that's what happened. I can do a quick zoom in for you Here we go. So notice when my brush had more water on it, when it had just been dipped from the water, the paint is thicker, and as the water sort of came off the brush and onto the paper, the paint sort of dried out. If you apply a little more water, the paint is sort of back to that nice thick and rich color that it once was. So it's kind of a mixture of finding out how much paint you need versus how much water you need. When it starts to dry out like that, you can add more water. Boop, boop. Just poke it. Hey, hey. And you get that nice rich color again. So you'll rinse your brush out. You will pet the bottom of your water caddy. Again, just petting it lightly like you would a very sensitive animal. Kind of swirl it a bit. You'll use a paper towel to pet the paper towel. See how there's still a little bit of red. Maybe I'll swish one more time. And I am pulling the bristles just like that. So now the brush should be fairly clean. And at that point, I can dip my brush into the blue. See, it stays a nice pure blue. Perfect. If there are two colors on your plate that you want to mix, by all means, go for it. Let's say I want to mix this blue with this red and pet it to make sort of a bluish purple. That is totally cool. That's what the plate's for, being able to mix colors so you can get your desired hue, but you never mix colors within your egg carton, only on the plate. So let's say I'm done with the purple and want to try some yellow out, or want to go back to blue or red. I do the exact same process that I did when I was changing from red to blue. I swish my brush, pet the bottom of my water cubby, pet my paper towel. See how there's still some color? I should probably swish it again. Pull the water out of my bristles. And should have a clean brush. Perfect. Then I can dip into my yellow. And I have a nice clean yellow. So even though we weren't painting on our first day, if it is the first day in class, I would still like you to practice this cleanup procedure at your table so it's familiar to you when we do start using paint. To clean up for painting is a bit of a process. It takes a lot of steps. So the two people at your table who volunteered to collect paint and painting materials and also to collect water caddies and red rags, those two people will do a very similar cleanup process as they did gathering materials. So here's how you can help at your table if you aren't one of those two people. So first of all, any brushes you use that are sitting in either of the two dry containers with your table color on them, you can make sure that you re-clean them again, or any brushes that you were using are cleaned, by rinsing them off in the one container at your table with your table color on it, with the clean water in it. And just making sure you rinse them off just like you did in your water caddy, and drying them off with a paper towel. If your paper towel is really dirty, maybe get a new paper towel to clean them off with, so they're as clean as they can be before they hit the sink. The reason that we're using the clean water in the container with your table color on it is because at this point, our water caddies are probably pretty grimy or have a lot of paint in them. So this makes sure that our brushes are as clean as possible before your volunteer takes them to the sink. The reason we don't want paint in the sink or painty brushes in the sink is because even though tempera paint, the paint that we're using, is water-based, it can still clog the sink. And we don't want that to. Once everybody's brushes have been cleaned off in the clean water that was in that container with your table color on it, you can dump that water into the bucket next to your table. Nice and clean. You can stack that with your brushes. Any brushes that were unused, you can put those in there too. They wouldn't hurt from a wash. They might have been used from another class. So this is how you help the person who's volunteering to clean your brushes. You make sure all your brushes are nice and clean, and you make sure all of the containers with your table color on them are stacked just how the person who brought them to your table found them. At this point, once your volunteer has taken those off, which Mr. Barber in the classroom will talk to you about, you can dump out the water that is in your water caddies. This water can also go into the buckets next to your table. So now you have a dried water caddy, or drying water caddy. At this point, the volunteer, who at the beginning of the day collected water caddies and red rags, can walk around and collect your red rags and water caddies and take them back to the painting cart. If for some reason there are paint trickles or water trickles at your table, it would be really helpful if you could use the red rag to quickly clean those up and then return it to the volunteer who is taking these materials back to the paint cart. We don't want to waste paint, and you are in charge of making sure that the paint in your egg carton is always usable for you. So at the end of every class period, you are going to make sure that this egg carton is put into the plastic bag with your name and period number on it. So you carefully put the egg carton into the plastic bag so it can sit on a level surface, just like this. Any excess air that there is, kind of just make sure that that is out of the bag. And then make sure that the entire Ziploc seal is closed, that there's no crack or pop. So that way no air gets in and dries out the paint. All of these are going to need to be put on your shelf, and they cannot be thrown into your shelf. They can't be tilted or laying sideways, because that'll gradually make one paint color fall into another paint color and really ruin the separation that these egg cartons allow. So please make sure that they're stacked carefully at the end of the day so your paint stays, so your 4 paint colors stay individual colors. So to prevent congestion by your classroom shelf, I'm going to have you pick one person at your table to return all of your egg carton paint palettes once they are tightly sealed into their Ziploc bags. So that means that only 4 people will be at the back shelf putting up paint palettes, the little egg cartons, and then 1 person will be at the back shelf returning all the paper plates from each of the 4 tables. So no more than 5 people need to be up behind the shelf. What you're doing is either volunteering to return material to the paint cart, cleaning your table, or waiting for your turn to turn your paintings into the drying rack to dry. Another thing that we're going to need to clean up at the end of each day is our paper plates. We are using paint responsibly. We were just poking paint, remember? So there shouldn't be a bunch of extra paint on our paper plates. Most of it should still be in the egg cartons for us to use. So by the end of each class period, these plates should be dry enough that we are able to stack them together and put them on our shelf as well, in addition to the egg cartons. So make sure that your plates are each stacked at your table. So tables have stacks of paper plates, and we can have a volunteer go around, collect those stacks, and put them in a single stack on your shelf. So during our first class period, we didn't have the opportunity to paint because we were focusing on cleanup procedures. So your piece will look something like this. Blank, but with your name and period number in the right-hand corner. If it is a class period where you did have the opportunity to paint, here's what your piece might look like. Regardless of where we're at, we're still going to practice putting away our pieces on the drying rack so we get used to that procedure. I will dismiss you by tables. When you hear me call your table to go put your pieces away, you may get up and put your artwork on the drying rack or hanging from the drying rack in an available space. So not on top of someone else's artwork or not in front of someone else's artwork, because they all need to dry. We don't want them to stick together. I'm calling you by tables so there isn't a big huge crowd at the drying rack at any given point. While you wait to be called to take your pieces to the drying rack, there's plenty that you need to do to clean. So your plates, make sure that you're throwing away paper towels, make sure that you're sealing your paint and putting that back on your shelf. You can do those tasks while you wait. So the following instructions are for the 2 volunteers who at the beginning of the day volunteered to collect paint, paper towels, and brushes and little containers with your table color labeled on them. That was one volunteer. The second volunteer volunteered to collect water caddies and red rags. These following instructions are for them. Even if you aren't one of those 2 volunteers today, it is important that you pay attention to these instructions so when it is your turn to do one of these 2 tasks, you know exactly what's expected of you at the end of a class period. So Mr. Barber in the classroom is going to help you with those instructions. Take it away, Mr. Barber.
So if you were one of the volunteers who grabbed a tray with the paint, paper towels, containers, and brushes on them at the beginning of the day, what you're going to do is once your table has rinsed off their brushes as well as they could in the clean water at your table, you will go ahead and take all those brushes that were used in one of your containers and wash them out in the sink. With your brushes, you'll want to take a handful and sort of pinch out any extra paint that may still be in there, running them under clean water. You can use a little bit of soap in your hand too. Please make sure that the bristles, just like when you're painting them, don't fray or get spread out, that you're sort of pinching them just like I am here. Make sure all the soap gets rinsed out. Style the hairdo, just like that. And then with clean brushes, you can put them bristle side up in your container, and this way you know that they're nice and clean and ready to go for the next class period. So volunteer 1, with your clean brushes, you'll go ahead and come back to your table. Your table mates should have put all the paints back on the tray, paper towels back on the tray, and dumped out the clean water that you rinsed out brushes in, and the other container from your table should be on the tray as well. So at this point, all you have to do is plop those clean brushes into the other containers, and then go ahead and take the tray back to the cart and put things back where you found them. So volunteer 2, your job for cleanup. Your table mates should have helped you out by dumping out the water that was in their water caddies into the bucket that's by your table on the floor. Let's say that there's still some paint streaks that look a little icky. You might want to go ahead and just dunk the water caddy into the red bucket so it gets a little more rinsed. So just make sure you're double checking that they're as clean as they can be. They don't have to be perfect, but you want to make sure they're usable for the next class. You will stack the caddies with the towel. You will make sure any moisture from the table is wiped up. Any paint that happened to get on the table, you clean that off. Collect the rags and take the rags and the caddies back to the paint cart and make sure they get put up where you found them. This is how you find the paint cart every day, and this is how it should look when you leave the classroom.
So at the end of the day, how you show me you're ready is you are behind your chairs at your tables with your chairs pushed in. The reason I have you do this is so I can double check your table, make sure that everything is cleaned up and that you are ready to go. If there's a little mess or something under the table, that makes it easy for me to tell you what you need to do before you can line up to make sure that the class is cleaned up and ready for the next class that comes in to work. So this was a lot of information. Painting requires a lot of materials, it requires a lot of cleanup, and it requires a lot of focus in making sure that we use paint right, and we also put materials back correctly so they're usable. They continue to be usable. As soon as I see that you as a class have gotten down the procedures for collecting and putting things away, and also have learned how to use basic painting techniques and using brushes appropriately, then we'll be able to move on to our lessons in color mixing and also layering color to eventually be able to create our Eagles Cafe sign and our realistic paintings of produce.